My name is Martin Geitz. I'm President and CEO of Simsbury Bank, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today for our fourth collaborative event with UConn School of Business Family Business Program. Our partnership with UConn has been wonderful. We've had three great programs to date, and today's program I think is going to be particularly interesting, talking about issues of transition and family businesses. We have a wonderful panel who Dean Elliott will be introducing you to momentarily. And so my primary role here is to welcome you and to introduce Dean Elliott. I'm very pleased to say that we've been working with Dean John A. Elliott for the last 2.5 years on this work, done a variety of projects with them. Dean Elliott has been Dean of the UConn School of Business since 2012, and he, in addition to being Dean of the Business School, is the Orrin J. Fox Chair of Business. Prior to joining UConn, he was the Dean of the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, and prior to that, he spent 20 years at my business school alma mater, Cornell University. During his career in academia, Dean Elliott, like all great academics, has had a great publishing and research career. His research has concentrated on the role of accounting information in financial analysis and in contracts. Recently, in 2018, just this year, Dean Elliott was elected the Vice Chair and Chair-elect of the AACSB International, the Association of Advanced Collegiate Schools of Business. He also serves as Chair of the PhD Project Academic Advisory Council. Very pleased to introduce you to Dean John Elliott.
Thanks very much, Martin. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your hospitality and the fact that you've been able to welcome such a wonderful group of people to this event this evening. The Family Business Program at UConn has been around for a long time, and it was interesting to me this evening to talk to a couple of people who were engaged with that program 20 years ago. And it may come out in the course of conversation exactly how those experiences from long ago have led to events that we're celebrating today in terms of some of the family businesses here. As we think about family businesses and our commitment at UConn to them, it's useful to put it in the context of the state of Connecticut and the fact that we think that it is important for the School of Business to be a convener of important conversations. And today, I think, is an example of an important conversation. Transition and succession planning for the next generation in family businesses. But to put this in context, let's think about family businesses as an example of many small businesses. And in the United States and in the state of Connecticut, about 99% of the organizations are in fact small businesses, fewer than 500 employees. And about 50% of the employment happens in those small businesses. And the growth is concentrated in those small businesses. So this is a really large opportunity and a large group of enterprising companies and individuals that we really want to see supported going forward. I was taken recently by an article in the Wall Street Journal that was about the book, The Founder's Dilemmas by Noam Wasserman. And in this marketing piece, if you will, for The Founder's Dilemma, there was a reference to the fact that often downplayed in the excitement of starting up a new business venture is one of the most important decisions entrepreneurs will face. Should they go it alone or bring in co-founders, hires, and investors to help build the business? More than just financial rewards are at stake. Friendships and relationships can suffer. Bad decisions at the inception of a promising venture lay the foundations for its eventual ruin. In recent coverage of Wasserman in the Wall Street Journal, one of the key section headings for family businesses and small businesses was raise painful subjects early. So as we go through our conversation today, I think one of the themes that I'll be interested in hearing about from our panel is what are the conversations that are really important here? How does their timing matter? And how do we get to them in due course? And what does due course mean? When is it timely? Our panel, I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. and to tell you just a little bit about who they are and what their connection to family business and transition and succession planning might be. Starting on my far right, we have Coleman Levy, a consultant advisor and founding partner of Levy and Droney, PC. We have Megan Summers West, president of CNC Software, Inc., and this is a second generation business. To my second right, Don Bodell, partner of Whitman Advisors, and finally Sabrina Beck, co-owner and vice president of business development at Altec Electronics. So could I ask you to begin, Sabrina, and just tell us a bit about yourself, transition, and your company?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm a second generation family business owner. My father started our company back in 1972, and I joined the company 20 years ago. Our company is Altec Electronics. We assemble circuit boards used in high-cost capital equipment like mammography machines and elevators. And I work with my father and my brother, who's the CEO.
Doc?
Hi, I had the opportunity to start at the other side of the economy and talk with large corporations, and did that for the first half of my career, and then in 2003, became involved with privately owned businesses, and I've never looked back. I find some of the best business people I've seen are really in entrepreneurial private businesses. Initially I came in to help private equity firms that wanted to invest in family-owned businesses and help them understand and work with the team. And that has transitioned to, I do a lot of advisory work with family businesses for both transitioning generationally, when they decide they would like to recapitalize. And so it could be helping to bring in talent that they don't have, or position a company for growth in the future.
Megan?
Megan West. I'm the president and CEO of CNC Software, and we're the makers of Mastercam. I've been running the company for the last 4 years, been there full-time for 10 years. Second generation, my father started the company 2 weeks before I was born, 35 years ago. So I've kind of gotten my PhD in business just by listening to him and my uncle. My mom is the CFO there. My uncle is the executive vice president. My dad still comes in once in a while. He's the chairman. I also have aunts, uncles, cousins. So we've got quite a few people there. We're up to about 180 employees, 190 actually now. And interestingly, I did want to mention, 20 years ago, I was a member of the UConn Family Business Program, and I utilized their services to kind of help me, talking with my dad about succession planning. So it's nice to kind of be back here and kind of having that conversation as well.
My name is Coleman Levy. I've been a practicing lawyer for over 50 years. I was a founding member of Levy and Droney. We merged in, I think in 2013 with Hinckley Allen, and I retired from the firm in the end of 2015, and have had a wonderful experience of being a advisor, consultant, negotiator, and evaluator for a number of my clients who asked me to stay on with them. In my experience, I've had the opportunity to represent primarily family-owned and privately owned businesses of varying sizes, from pizza shops to family-owned businesses that do $750+ million a year. And I've been very much involved as the advisor in terms of succession planning and how to deal with that. And I've been in situations of successfully navigating that river, and also have been involved, unfortunately, in situations where there were implosions and breakups. And I can tell you this, I've learned a lot more from the breakups, unfortunately, than from the successes. And so that's sort of my background. In addition to that, my wife has run a family business, which is now in the second generation. So we've been able to experience that transition also. So not only do I have a little bit of the theoretical, but I have a lot of the practical.
So when we talk about transition and succession, those two words come together to sort of suggest that the answer will be a continuation in the family, going from one generation to the next. But not all transitions are of that type. So let me ask each of you to share some perspective on when it's time to start thinking about transitions and how you think about the question, is it a transition within the family as succession, or is it some other opportunity that needs to be considered and discussed and evaluated? You want to give us a start?
Sure. So in my experience, our business transitioned back in 2004. My father, I believe, was 65. And I think he had some concerns and some doubts about whether the succession would be successful. And here we are in 2018, and we have grown to 35 million in revenue and 200 employees. So in our case, our succession was successful. I think that the reason my father considered transitioning the business to his children is because he wanted to stay involved in the business. And he felt by bringing the children in, it would be his way to do that. If he sold the company, he'd probably have to exit after a period of time. So my dad, who's 87, is still involved in our business today. And he comes in every day and runs the engineering team and is still a vital part of our company. So that was meaningful to him. And I think that was the biggest reason he transitioned within the family.
What have you experienced, Don?
So I've been involved in over 100 transactions or transitions, and I've seen them done very well and done very poorly. And I think the ones that were done well is when the family dynamics that are complex and can be emotional are identified, but the decisions are based on hard, objective data, and people separate the two. Some of the ones where I have seen where family, we have said we're going to keep it in the family, and they have ignored that, it's not always gone well. I'm working now with a company that went through the transition and said the fourth generation is not up to the task. And they brought me in, and we actually recruited a COO who will become CEO. And there is a fifth generation involved, but they're going very professionally. We're putting together a board of directors to run it as more like a public company, but keep it in the family. So in this case, they've been able to do both.
So for me, it was kind of interesting. I knew by the time I was maybe 5 or 6 years old that this is what I wanted to do. And so my dad really nurtured that and spent a lot of time kind of developing my interest in business. So for us, timing was everything. And my dad's pretty young. We just celebrated his 60th birthday back in June. So he's young, but he also, he identified pretty quickly that the business sort of outgrew his interest and his skill level and what he was good at. He started off as an applications engineer, so he was very technical, but the job really grew into much more of an operations, talking to people, that kind of thing, and it just wasn't what he loved to do, and it definitely caused some stress for him. So he was ready to pass it off, as soon as he could. That being said, we also didn't try and fit a square peg into a round hole. If I wasn't qualified or capable, he wouldn't have passed it down to somebody else in the family. We were lucky that it was something that I was interested in, something that I went to school for, and something that I was really qualified for. And we spent a lot of time making sure that I was positioning myself so that the employees there trusted me and were confident in my leadership skills. So in terms of timing, I think timing is everything. You gotta make sure that you take all the right steps and be very intentional about those steps that you take. Communicate to the right people and not try and force something that isn't going to work.
What's your experience been, Coleman?
Well, first of all, I want to say you're very fortunate that your father.
I am.
No, you're very fortunate that your father had that foresight and the ability to let go, which is one of the real major problems in business transition that I've seen, okay? Number one, a couple of the elements that I really try and profess to people is that as there was an article in the New York Times just recently, November 17th, the Talk with Kids, how and when to talk to your children about money. Have a plan and be ready to listen. Because when you're in a family business and you have a family business, finances are going to be discussed at the dinner table whether you like it or you don't like it. So that's part of the problem, the process of being transparent and being honest and being open with the children in the family. And then understand that leadership is not determined by seniority or by sex, okay? It's determined by ability. And to be honest about that, maybe all the children will have the same equity, but that doesn't necessarily that just because a person is the oldest that they're going to be the next CEO of the company, or maybe they're not going to be involved. So what I've seen mostly is the problems occur when there isn't openness and discussion and honesty. And where I see the problems occur is you'll learn when you have to learn. And when you have to learn, it's too late.
You've raised an interesting question there, and I think I'd like to come back to you, Megan, and ask you to tell us a little bit more about your process, because there's a tendency to think that Dad wakes up one morning and says, you know, it might be time for me to move on and hand it off, and 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months later, we're all done. How long did your planning process and structuring take to get you from, I think I'm ready and my dad thinks I am, to I'm the CEO?
Well, I mean, again, I'm kind of unique. My process started almost 20 years ago when I was 16. You know, we went to a family business program seminar and talked to other companies that were in different stages of succession. And they gave us some ideas on how to kind of set ourselves up for success. So we put a very clear plan in place that I had to go to school, I had to work somewhere else for 2 years, you know, partly for my own self-confidence, but also the credibility of the employees, get a good perspective. And then I had to get my MBA. And then once I did that and, you know, moved back to the office, I started there full time, and I had to work in a few different departments just to gain some perspective, some understanding, some empathy. And you know, my dad always uses the word positioning. And if I didn't position myself properly, then I wouldn't have been considered for leadership. And what I mean by positioning is earning that respect and that trust and that confidence of the employees, because if you can't get them to buy into your leadership, then, you know, I'm going to struggle. So I spent a lot of time really working on my relationship with the employees and making sure that they were comfortable with me and making sure that I was comfortable with them. So, you know, I started full-time about 10 years ago. And I worked in several different departments, became the operations manager about 5.5, 6 years ago. And that was really when, you know, we kind of decided that it was going to happen. And then 2 years later, I became the CEO. And, you know, I think it was pretty clear to all the employees, it is a very close family business. And at that time, we were maybe 120, 130 employees. You know, I knew the names of every single one of their spouses, all their kids, you know, what they like to do on the weekend, that kind of thing. And so we were pretty close and very open. But it was a long process, and you know, I think that not rushing into it was good, because I was able to make some very important strategic decisions even before I became CEO, and that helped to increase the confidence level of the employees as well, that they got comfortable with my leadership style, they knew what they were getting into, and so that made it a very smooth transition. It you know,
Right.
It was very
and
seamless.
Coleman is right. You were in a lucky place with a family that
Absolutely.
had foresight and planning, and in Wasserman's terms, you raised a painful subject of transition early and planned and got through it. And let me ask you, Sabrina, to give us a little bit of that same level of granularity, if you would, about your experience. What was the time frame?
I had graduated from college and went to work in the financial services industry and worked there for 10 years before I joined the family business. My brother joined 5 years prior to me, even though he's a couple of years younger than I am, but just in his career, that was the right time to come into the business. And so I really cherish the years that I had working for financial services and developing some knowledge and some self-confidence and just kind of a worldview of how things worked before coming into the family business. Because as family businesses, they typically, if you're the first or second or third generation, you're experiencing the business growing from its infancy, and so you don't necessarily have the opportunity to see how bigger companies do things unless you spend some time there. And so I was able to bring some knowledge and some information with me that helped me to succeed in the family business. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question, thank you.
Very good.
But it was a multi-year effort, in some ways similar to Megan.
Yes.
Coleman, examples from your experience of the good and the bad on this?
Well, I'll make it lineal in a sense of not saying, it just becomes more complex when, say, two brothers start a business and then you're into the next generation, okay? But I'll just bring up that when you get into the second generation and, the first generation, the children all came out of one household with one mother and father, basically, okay? And the values that were transmitted, whatever they may be, were pretty similar to all of the children. Now we get into the second generation, okay? And now the children, their children are growing up, and there's different wives or different husbands, and the values in the houses are a little different, and they're brought up a little differently. And therefore, this is when conflict starts to arise, okay, or can arise, okay? Then you can see how this multiplies almost geometrically when the starters of the business were two brothers or two sisters or a brother and a sister, and then we've got families out here, and then we have to start making some rules and regulations as to how we're going to transmit and how we're going to transfer authority, okay, and decision-making ability. And I always bring up this point, and I've said this to many clients, and I've said, you started the business and you made a mistake, okay, and it cost $10,000, okay? You buried it. You didn't come home and brag to your wife that you screwed up today and we lost $10,000, okay? But in the second generation, when you're dealing with your son or your daughter, you're quick to be a Monday morning quarterback and point out those negatives and not so quick to reinforce the positives, okay? What you want to do is reinforce the positives, and when there's something that goes wrong, be constructive about it and sit down and discuss it and figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how we can avoid that in the future instead of using a stick over the head. And I just find that to be something that's prevalent in the difference between the first generation and second generation. And I see a lot of people sitting around and going like this, okay? So I'm not far off base.
Don, you talked about having 100 examples. Can you cherry pick two that sort of inform us about these choices?
Sure. I'd like to use two. First of all, what Megan and Sabrina had done is their transition was indicative of what I've seen as successful in a number of ways. One, working outside the business, and the other thing, they are complimenting you on wanting to gain the respect of the employees. A lot of the unsuccessful ones I've seen where I've got the name And they kind of think that gives them the respect, and you've got to earn respect, as everyone knows. The other example that I helped put together the first time I did a board for a family business that was doing what Coleman just talked about was the father retired and moved to Florida and had 3 siblings in the business. He retired and was transitioning ownership over a period of years, but he would fly up every other month and tell them everything they were doing wrong. And it was horrible. They then, the siblings were fighting in-house. They ended up getting a psychologist to work with them that specialized in it. And now I'm helping them through the generation transition to the next one, and they learn from that. And they're putting a plan in place, and they're doing what you did, where they have to work 5 years outside of it, and so it's working well. But I think you're spot on, and those are some of the issues that you see multiple times.
And the other thing that happens many times is that I've found in talking to the owners of the business, I said, you necessarily will not be the person who will designate who the leader of this company will be, but it will be your offspring, your children will sit around the table, and they will basically end up, if they've been brought up correctly and understand that the objective, remember this, the objective all the time is that the cow has to remain healthy. If the cow does not remain healthy, okay, the milk will get rancid and everybody will get sick. If the cow is healthy all the time, the milk is sweet, okay, and everybody prospers. That's a very critical element, okay? And I'm going to just give you an example of one situation that I had in a family, okay? And there was one operating business. There was one boy, one male, and 3 females. And what happened is the son was running the business. He had gone out and then came back and ran it. And one of the daughters was in the business, and she got married, and she left and went to Boston, and the other was in Boston. And everybody was doing well. And we had a family meeting, and the father asked if I would conduct a family meeting. We conducted a family meeting, and they all agreed that the business should be his. We're going to put a price on it. They put a mortgage, and the 3 girls got the monthly payment for a period of 10 years, giving up their interest. Everybody was happy, and the family really gets along exceptionally well. And they come to Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, and they all talk to each other, okay? And but it was open and honest and discussed, and they all agreed to it, and they were all satisfied. And so I think openness is a critical element in the process.
So Simsbury Bank's purpose in collaborating with UConn and the Family Business Program is to create more knowledge and more access to information that's useful to family businesses, useful to our economy, and frankly, useful to Simsbury Bank. Many of our folks are here today, and this is another opportunity for them to learn about family businesses, and we are trying to and continue to try to build our knowledge in family businesses because we'd like to be the bank for family businesses in Connecticut, and this has been a great way for us to do it, partnering with UConn and UConn's Family Business Program. One of the other things that we're doing, Simsbury Bank is doing now to add to knowledge and conversation in the state is focusing on manufacturing. Manufacturing is really a growth driver of Connecticut's economy today. And we launched several months ago a podcast series called Manufacturing Matters. And although the focus is on manufacturing, many of our guests have been family business owners or advisors to family business owners. So inevitably in the podcast, you'll get also insights into family businesses and manufacturing. If you go to your podcast app and type in Manufacturing Matters. We will pop up there somewhere in there, and you can, I'd encourage you to check those out.